This is Jim the Keys bartender coming to you from Key Largo. It's a beautiful day here in Key Largo. It's a bit warm. My heart goes out to the people of the Panhandle in Alabama for all the flooding and all the stuff going on in the interior right now. But that's this time of year. I hate to say that, and it's a roll of the dice. It could very well have been here or any place else along the southern coast. And more and more happens up further up north. But we're not discussing that today. I am talking about the Keys. We're in the Florida Keys. I'm a bartender. Keys, hence the name Keys Bartender Show. Well, not called the Keys Bartender Show. It's actually because of my media group that managed the podcast for a while. It changed to Florida Keys Bartender. Originally started out with Keys Bartender Live because I did my live show, and then I became the Keys Bartender podcast, and then in order to help with the searches, which I don't think there's a ton of searches, but I guess if someone searches Florida Keys, they wanted it to show up in their search for a podcast. I'm talking about the management group, the media consultant group that I'm currently still part of their network. They wanted to have Florida Keys in there, so many searches like that. And now I'm contemplating going back to Keys Bartender. But change is inevitable, and we are always in a constant flux. I just remember going back to my 10-year reunion in high school, and it was actually I think it was a big hullabaloo, kind of like 20-year. It could have been a 20-year anniversary of the founding of the high school. It was a big Catholic girls and boys school. They were separated, so the Catholic boys, it was a high school with boys on one side, girls on the other, separated by a accordion type fence in the hallways. And I was invited. I remember I was out with some friends, and someone mentioned that the anniversary was coming up, and they were having it. They were going to have open bar and stuff like that, and tickets were like some ridiculously cheap. I think it was like $20 at the time, or $40, whatever it was. It was open bar and all that stuff. We made it actually very inexpensive, and you get to go and see people you went to school with, and even the people that graduated 20 years before. The women were still in their, I guess, late 30s, so everyone was still relatively young. I was in my 20s. And I remember distinctly, the one person I remember, and we're going to talk about memories and things like that today. And if you're interested in calling, this is live, if there are any live listeners, the phone number is 407-392-4563. Remember, if you do call in, you're going to be live as soon as I pick up. I don't know necessarily if I'll hear it, though. Wait, is my Skype on? It is now, just to make sure that if it is ringing. So there was a friend of mine through several years. He was a somewhat, I wouldn't call him an introvert, but he was an intelligent young man. I'll go by his first name, Brian. Wasn't socially active, kind of socially awkward. He had he was pale, and a nice guy, Brian. And at one point, I had started high school, and I had been in more of the heads group. When I say heads group, it was guys that drank beer and smoked pot my freshman year, and then I slowly came to the conclusion that I wanted to go to college. And not that those guys didn't go to college and things like that, but the group of people I was hanging out with, that wasn't their goal. But I started moving to this other group, and it was groups that uh, were involved with more of the academic extracurricular activities and things like that. I had started out, I ran track, played a little football, and things like that. And as the more I got in this group, I started hanging out with the smarter kids. And both groups were kind of, there was one major characteristic. There weren't a lot of girls hanging with us until I got into my junior year. And among my group, I was one of the few that actually was able to talk to girls and actually go on dates. But there's one guy, Brian, who was the most insular of all. Uh, he he was in this, he did well in the school. His grades were probably the same or better than mine. I was up there. I ended up 15 out of 500. A couple times I was, once or twice I ended up in the top five. But I didn't take the heavily weighted academic courses enough in order to get myself in the top 10. But 15 out of 500 is pretty good. I was president of the National Honor Society. It was a big group in my school, considering there were 2,100 males in the school, and there was a mirror equivalent on the girls' side. But Brian didn't have a lot of friends, but he hung out with us, and we did some extracurricular activities, like they tried to put together some Dungeons and Dragons things and stuff like that. And the guys were mainly, I wouldn't call them antisocial, they just weren't socially adept, but they were nice, very nice guys, as well as the other guys in sports and stuff like that. And I kind of hung around with, there was the theater crowd, there were the sports guys, and stuff like that. So I was leaning heavily towards the academic, a little towards the sports, and Brian was way into the academic. One time though, I'm at home, and I was a senior year of high school, and I was working at a catering hall, and ever since my sophomore year, late sophomore year, I was a year older than everyone, since I did a repeat appearance in second grade. So I was a year older. I had a car. My father got me a car when I was turned 16, ostensibly to drive my sister, who was a year older, to work, and my grandmother, if she ever needed to go to the store. So my dad didn't have to go back and forth. We lived with my grandmother, and we didn't. She didn't have a license, and my sister didn't either, and for whatever reason it was. So one time I'm at home and I get a phone call. Now you remember this is 1981, and it was a fall in 1981. It was the middle of the week, and Brian and his mother had been at the supermarket, and their car broke down or wouldn't start. I think I ended up attempting to jump the car, if I can remember. We're going to talk about memory and things like that, but I seem to remember that we couldn't get the car started, and I drove them home with their groceries. And since then, I was put on a kind of hero status with Brian. I guess I was a friend. He knew I had a car and he called me up, and I showed up, and I did that. We weren't that tight of friends. And then later on, I was invited to, he had parties and things like that. And I think went to one party and they watched the Beatles. It was I guess it was before video, but it was a VHS or a tape of the Beatles, the one they play on the rooftop of a building, and it must have been for their White Album or their post-White Album or something like that. And I wasn't, I digress. I'm remembering things as I'm saying them. But Brian also wrote a gospel according to his last name. I don't want to say his last name because I don't know if he wants to be reminded of a lot of the things. But they're not bad things. I just, I did say he was somewhat socially not socially awkward and things like that. You didn't see him being able to talk to girls, had a hard time making friends. So he wrote a gospel according to his nickname of his last name, he put in. But it was about me in the position. It was a farce. It was me in the position of Christ, and it was written and my friends were kind of like the apostles. And it was kind of, I guess it was right after the life of Brian or right before the life of Brian. And they did that. My sister, I think she still has a copy of it, or someone has a copy of it. So years later, and then bring this in conclusion, it was 10 minutes into the story, I go to this 20-year anniversary of my high school. And lo and behold, this guy, Brian, shows up. He's wearing a leather jacket. He looks a little more fit. His hair's a little cooler, and he has a young girl with him, girl in her early 20s. And Brian is a adjunct professor at a university in chemistry. I think it was chemistry, and I'm assuming this was an undergrad he was with. But nowadays with the Me Too movement, I don't know if there was anything. But she looked like she was there on her own volition. And it turned out Brian had rode to the anniversary on a motorcycle. And in these 20 years in between, I had kind of meandered through life. Brian did pretty much what we thought he'd do, become an academic. But his personality changed. Because here he is with a woman. He's riding a motorcycle and things like that. Now, obviously, he's talking to different people. And Brian, these are my friends in the academic circles were, a lot of times there were people I had to kind of defend against the other groups. And Brian, 20 years later, wasn't when I was saying 20 years later, it wasn't 20 years later for Brian. This would have been about 10 years later. It would have been in the early 90s, late 80s. So he was in his late 20s. He's 27, 28. And he changed. He changed. So, yeah, he wasn't the same person. But he was friendly. He still had the same feelings of me. And I imagine he thought the same thing of me. He said, boy, Jim changed. Here he is. He was single. I was single-minded. I was very political at the time, ambitious. And I wasn't as ambitious at that time when I met up with Brian again. But I became much more social with especially with the ladies. So I'm postulating, and a lot of people postulate, that you really never meet the same person twice, much like stepping into a river. The old adage, you never step into the same river twice. Some people might say people don't change, but I would counter they do change. Some people change less, some people change more, but they're always changed by their experiences. Just think of it. When someone's born, humans of all the living creatures on Earth, you could probably point out a couple other ones that are similar, but they take the longest to get independent of their parents or parent. That the baby starts out with much like a new laptop or computer, like in the old days when they didn't preload the programs on the computer. It had all this potential, but very little capability unless you purchased. It came with an operating program, and the operating program, I would equate it to your autonomic responses, meaning breathing, heartbeat, brain waves, eyesight, hearing. You have those, but the programs that run with it to give it capabilities as much wasn't that great. And from some of the readings that I've done, that the comparisons don't end there. There's estimated that human storage lies between 10 and 100 terabytes. Remember, 1 terabyte is 1,000 gigabytes. And there's even speculation because that it's actually 2.5 petabytes. And a petabyte is 1,000 terabytes, which would be 1 million gigabytes. So 2.5 is 2.5 million gigabytes of storage. And I hesitate to call it memory, but there's about 85 billion neurons in the human brain, and there's point 0.2, I think they're saying, quadrillion connections that can possibly be made. And every time a new memory is made, a new pathway is given. So the way a baby comes about, we know anecdotally what happens, how babies develop, how they acquire human language and things like that. And you think about and I'm only speaking probably to people that believe in that the humans have been around more than 6,000 years. If you go back 10,000 years ago, before written language, that if you took, because there was very little genetic change, if you took someone and cleaned them up, had a baby one way or another, a Homo sapien from 10,000 years ago or a Homo sapien born today would have very little different visual cues that make them separate. And from raising one and the other in those environments would make them more or less the same. So if someone was raised in a hunter-gatherer society 10,000 years ago, let's say in central France, or in present-day Shanghai, and swapped other than the obvious visual cues, let's just say they were adopted, right? You took them to, present day, let's keep it in France. You're regular in central France 10,000 years ago, central France today. Swap the babies, give them the same whatever current thing of the day, hunter-gatherer society or education in today's world. They'd be virtually indiscernible if you swap those babies, just like if you swap the baby in a maternity ward in a hospital. Whether that baby is swapped, not that there were maternity wards 10,000 years ago. I mean, you went into the hut and you took the baby, or you went into maternity. Let's say you're a time traveler, and you're able to steal a baby from a maternity ward and drop it off in central France, there in a settlement there. And besides the other things that go into making it past, immunizations and things like that in early childhood diseases, if you raise them to like 20 years old, they'd be significantly different. Besides language, writing, technology, and the process of learning itself, creating memories, are as different today. But if you raised that baby from 10,000 years ago today, they would have the same, you wouldn't tell them any different that they were born 10,000 years ago. But if you took that same baby, let's say two same babies, and this is the nature versus nurture argument, and raised them in two households right in the same village in France, with different experiences. Let's say the parents were neglectful and abusive in one household, and they're nurturing and affectionate in the other household. You swap those, they would come out, let's say you separate twins, they would come out significantly different. I know there are stories of triplets. There's the triplets that got separated at birth and they came together. But that could have been like most people behave a certain way in a family. And I was talking about extremes. One extreme is being a bad extreme, one is being a positive environment. I'm saying that experience, those experiences change that person. And experiences of regular people change them. And how I relate it to the bar is that I have people come in, and I mentioned on a previous episode, come in, they were in previously 2 years before we had a nice, I don't recall this, and this is memory, this is called long-term memory and short-term memory. I didn't recall them. I did recall a positive vibe from them. I was nice people and stuff like that. It was a couple during their late 30s, early 40s, and they were effusive with their praise. They were very friendly. They said they had a good time. But I imagine they're not remotely, they're different. They are different from the people that they were 2 years ago. I'm not saying they're better or worse. They're different from the things they know now and the things they experienced just through life, like suffering. Suffering changes somebody. Someone could have been in a prison camp for a prisoner of war for a couple of years. That significantly changes people. People go to traumatic circumstances through a serious accident, a serious illness, and you'll know that person has a life-changing event, a life-changing perspective. Just think of that, though, when we're talking about the amount of storage that someone has in their brain. And you think, well, if there's that much storage in there, how come a computer can beat a human? Well, computers have specialized access to memories and moves that humans don't have. So a computer can remember 10 million moves and have readily access to those moves depending on the situation of the move by its competitor. Where a human, not only does it have to remember moves and play it out, it is remembering what it ate last Thursday, what the wife or husband wants for their birthday, or remember the project they have to do for work. And there's a million things going on. So humans aren't as specialized as computers. So you can find a computer that's excellent on Jeopardy, and they could beat Ken, the guy that, the champion. But you can't get a computer to just walk into a bar and have a good time, blah, 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 and do things like that. It can answer questions. That's what it can do. Now, someday they might be able to do that when they become that, and I've made jokes about it in the past, but humans are different that way. And it's the expectation is that humans are adaptable and able to organize differently. They organize non-specifically as computers do, more regimentedly. Okay? So if I remember my history facts, I remember when I learned, how I learned it, and I can place it in relation to these other things. See, I can think of a song by perhaps the Rolling Stones, and I'll think about the Reformation, like a Sympathy for the Devil. The song by Rolling Stones makes me think of Martin Luther's 99 Thesis. That's just my association. Yes, you could teach a computer to remember that way, but that's not the way that computers remember. They don't associate that, and they don't prioritize memories. So the memory that a computer has, that the amount of petals that a daisy has, is pretty much same priorities as remembering, we better be careful around this person. If we say these words, that'll set them off. Humans have have a unique, adaptable way of retrieving memories. And another thing that we used to, I think that people, the expectation is that people that have great memories are super intelligent. Now, think of an autistic kid that could solve, that remembers exactly where you live, or remember the exact date it was and what happened on that date, blah, 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 and all the history things. But then you can ask the person that says, well, how would you greet somebody if you went to the birthday party and this was happening, this music was playing, they were playing Pin the Tail on the Donkey? This kid could be completely clueless. Putting into a social situation, or even pretty much adapting other information. It says, well, here's a football game going on. It's fourth down. There's 5 yards ago. What should they do? And the kid has no clue what that means. It's not always applicable to all. Having a great memory is not applicable to problem solving. Getting that aha moment. So when I meet someone years later, my memory clicks in. I remember bits and pieces of it, unless something that really made it unique. There's remember from years ago, when I focus on when I was 14 years old, 13 years old, I'm talking 45 years ago, 44 years ago, I remember young girls that I had crushes on and stuff like that. I remember this specifically. I don't remember. I can virtually remember nothing that happened in classroom. I remember in 8th grade classroom reading the story about a fox and a chicken. I think that was Le Renard and Lecoq or something like that. Or I think it was just Le Renard. And I remember that I didn't know any of the French words, and I couldn't remember them. I had a hard time conjugating the words. I had a hard time doing all this. But now, as I get older, I do have a difficulty, but I have no problem processing if I study conjugation for future tense, past, present tenses, possession, and things like that. That's just, it's called neuroplasticity and the way we remember things. And it may be that forgetfulness is a way that we prioritize the information that we need to have at the time. When I see somebody that comes into the bar, I don't remember, if I haven't seen them for a while, I don't remember their names right away. And then I have to put it in context. I have to think about, wait, what the fuck? Oh, I remember this. Now, I always remember the name of the guy that comes in and said that outrageous statement about the woman down the bar. I remember that guy. Or I remember the girl that threw a drink. Or I remember exactly what the girl looks like that smacked me in the face 28 years ago when she was at a bar after applying for a job at a place I worked, and then she tried to talk to me, and then she got pissed off about not getting a job, and then was picked up on the vibe directly that I really didn't want anything to do with her. And presto, she smacks me. I remember distinctly. I remember distinctly when I was in my early 20s when I was talking to a young girl in a bikini, and how she was sitting next to a pool, and how her skin was shiny with suntan lotion, and how the multicolored bikini top was, and how skimpy it was. I remember that. But do I remember last week what I had for lunch? No, I can't. One day I may have had a roast beef sandwich. I'm pretty sure one day I had a roast beef sandwich. It's a specific day I don't. It depends on how important it was. So that led me to believe and say, wow, people do change. And I remember people when I was younger, the guys I hung out with, I'm not in touch with them as much anymore, so I have to really reflect on, and I probably will run into them years later, and it's going to be interesting, because 40 years, in a couple of years, it'll be 40-year high school anniversary, and that's a bellwether statement for how someone's going to react. 40-year high school reunion. But the other one that really gets me is the family reunions. When you see what happens to your cousins that you haven't seen that often. A brother and sister are hard to gauge that because they change incrementally over years most times. My sister and I are diametrically opposed politically. She sees things, and I realize she has visceral, fearful responses to new information or new ideas. So that makes her conservative. And over the reading, I used to believe that conservative people were less creative and less likely to make connections with new ideas and be able to incorporate it in their lives. And then I started thinking, maybe it's the way our brains are made up and how we're doing it. So I've met, and I come to this conclusion, that there are super conservative people that are super intelligent. There are very uninformed people of both ilk, liberal and conservative. But one of the main things I see as a difference comes back to the basis on the definition of conservative versus liberal versus change. And things are going to change no matter what. Things are going to change no matter what. There's nothing you could do to stop change. Now, what kind of change that's going to be, we disagree on what that would be. But some people say, the environment changes, you can't do anything about it. We go through periods of warm years and cool years, and right now we're in a period of heat, and there's nothing we could do about it. So don't affect my standard of living by changing from fossil fuel burning vehicles and fossil fuel power to solar power and electric cars, and they build a defense mechanism over the change, because they say they accepted the change, that change occurs. So they do accept change occurs, like aging. They understand age. People understand everyone ages. I think most people understand that you're going to age, and you're not, a 70-year-old man is not a 20-year-old man. But the idea that the things that happened 50 years ago are going to be the things that are going to happen now, meaning politically, that's the part that they want to keep the same. Meaning that's something that makes them comfortable. They're not innately, I believe, a lot of these people that hold conservative views are not innately racist or hateful. They're just the way, this is the way it was then, this is the way it's now, this is what I knew, what happened. I knew what would happen when I interact with the police show up. Respect for authority. There's nothing wrong with respect for authority, but there's also has to be a recognition when someone oversteps their bounds of authority, a misuse of power. So that those things are different. Now, so I think it's our visceral reaction to things like there's more. They may show a hyper sensitivity to something that changed, meaning someone more conservative may have a bigger reaction at a horror house. It's funny, conservatives like to call liberals kind of pussies and stuff like that. Well, I hate to call them more brave or less brave. There is neither. You have, if that were the case, that conservative people were tougher than liberal people, then obviously conservative counter-revolutions would have overpowered every liberal revolution that you would call, like communist revolutions and something like that. And I have this feeling that you can be conservatively communist. You can be conservative communist, or conservative Democrat, or conservative Republican, or you could be a liberal communist, a liberal Republican, liberal Democrat, a monarchist. I guess a monarchy would be someone that believed in a monarchy, and said, listen, we just need a monarch. There was one of my favorite books was I discovered almost 20 years ago, was Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy O'Toole. And the main character was a young man who rarely changed. He was oddball character. It takes place in early 1960s New Orleans, and he's a well-educated homebody, and he believes in a theocratic monarchy. very conservative in his politics, but very outrageous in his behavior. And he was fearful of change, tremendous fearful of change. He has his own routine. He would stay in his room. They never really outward saying, but he's masturbating in his room most of the time because there's tissues all over the place. And he has these black and white binders, notebooks, where he writes his ideas down on. It's kind of medieval Catholic philosophy on life and politics and society. And he may strum the lute and all that stuff. And he's severely obese. Not that they go hand in hand. It just happens to be Casey's character. And he was overly affectionate to his dog, who passed away years before, because he has a picture of it. I think he has a picture of his dog he talks about. And that idea, when I'm talking to someone nowadays, and this is as we're coming closer to the election, we're running to people, and I run into my relatives, I notice I always wondered, why would the note "Make America Great Again" strike such a ardent note? Like, why would you want to go backwards? Why would you ever want to go backwards? Like the person would, like, I guess it would be like one of those rom-coms where you go back and being a teenager, and you get the, like, Peggy Sue Got Married, or the opportunity to change things for your place in life, like Back to the Future. But that things were better. They were different. That's what they were. Things were different. They weren't better or greater. At the time, it could have been great, but if you brought back 1950 society to now, I think in the end you'd have a problem with it, because everyone kind of changes. I mean, I've accepted through history, I'm a believer in history and science, that during the Civil War, and here I am speaking as a person that's currently supporting our Democratic nominee for president, the Republican Abraham Lincoln and the Republicans in the U.S. in the Civil War were the party of emancipation. And the Democratic Party was more of a party of acquiescence. They wanted to sign a peace treaty with the South. They would have, a large segment of the Democratic Party during the Civil War would have most likely have allowed for a settlement with the South that included the allowance for the institution of slavery to survive. And I'm able to accept it. You know why? Because things changed. People changed it. In the 1950s, there were a lot of segregationists in the Democratic Party. And nowadays, the last of the segregationists, and there were some old ones in the Senate and stuff like that, there were some old Democrats until the 90s, that were, when they were younger, they were loosely affiliated with segregationists, and heavily, maybe associated with the KKK, and they were in the Democratic Party. But that has changed now. So being able to accept change, there has to be the middle ground, and eventually there will be. I accepted half-heartedly that Clinton had lost the election in 2016. I do believe that the country would have been better off if they had elected her. I don't know it would have been better off, considering they may have been running criminal investigations against her and things like that, much like they did against Trump. But I believe, we can get into arguments on it. There seems to be a lot of smoke coming out of from the Trump accusations, from the sexual assaults to the loans from Russia to not revealing your tax returns and things like that. But I do understand why people might want to defend someone like. Now I do. I'm starting to more and more. I understand why someone might want to side with Trump for several reasons. Because he shows a sign of he supports me. He's kind of like supporting me. That's what they're thinking right now. And in order to keep that up, they have to reject anything. They have to reject everything that would show that he doesn't care about them. They can't accept that he's told Bob Woodward that he thought that the airborne virus was deadly and it was 5 times worse than the flu. They can't accept that he said it, because then they couldn't accept him having the big rallies and not encouraging people to have masks. And the whole mask thing, like, that's a change thing. I don't, having to change, that's part of the change. They don't want to, if you think about not wanting to change, having to wear a mask, it's such a big change. And that's got to hurt. It's got to hurt. It's got to hurt as much as for them. And it hurts. I understand it hurts them. Just as it hurt them, the certain person, when they had a restaurant. Let's say they're a restaurateur. And maybe they didn't, let's say they strongly agreed that African Americans should not dine with Caucasians. And they believed for a reason, for some reason. And then when they said, well, you got to do it now, or, they're going to sue you. I mean, it took a while, probably. There's still places now, I'm sure, you that people don't want to serve them, or they only want to serve certain kind. So, I mean, it's change, and it's fearful of it. You're fearful of the Charlottesville march, where the people say, immigrants won't replace us, Jews won't replace us. I don't know what they mean by that. Mean replace us, like on the top tier. You're already. Let me tell you something though. If you're marching from a superior position, you believe you're superior, and you're marching with idiots with tiki torches to reassert your preeminence as a superior race, you've already displayed a sign of ignorance that you're not superior. Because someone who's superior, if you think about someone who's really, when you think of it, superior status, let's say superior status, not a thing. Let's say they get angry, people angry at Beyonce and let's say J-Lo and A-Rod and stuff like that. They may hate them. They hate them. They hate those guys. White people hate them because they have money, they have voices, and they just pisses them off. Well, the status they have is because of their money and because of their influence over a segment of society, which you do not have. You do not. If you don't have their money, then they have superior to that. They're superior to you in influence. So all the superiority you're able to display is the one that you do when you're marching. That we can march better, or we can organize a flotilla of boats that may or may not float. So you're not really displaying that. If you really want to display, enter into a debate or a thoughtful conversation. I did give my number here for people to call in, but unfortunately on a podcast, you're not going to find people that will validate their own uncertainty, because it's the antithesis to being that way. Now, the weakness of the liberal cause or the democratic cause is that we allow for different views. And with the Me Too movement. We've had people where we've shot down our own icons. Uh, uh, that the senator from Minnesota, you know, they chased him out. I mean, we don't, we're the first to shoot them down. Like, just, there's a meme on Facebook that says, um, the Epstein, if they keep on digging into the Epstein thing, it's someone with a MAGA hat and with a Democrat hat, and they're standing together and they're saying, you hit this button, it triggers the investigation. But just remember, this investigation will reveal whether Trump or Clinton did, and the person's hitting the button. Because it's pretty much like what that attorney said in the movie JFK. Garrison, now this is my memory at work, Garrison said about the investigation into Kennedy's assassination that let though heavens may fall, I think I'm paraphrasing this, and I'm roughly paraphrasing it, follow this investigation though the heavens may fall, meaning that it's so destructive that we will bring down our own idols. And we're more accepting of that. Like, we won't. Once I as a child, I used to. I have a nuanced understanding of the Kennedy legacy right now. I realize that the Kennedys did some things that were somewhat unfortunate, very unfortunate. Ted Kennedy in Chappaquiddick, John with his misogyny, the way he treated women, and it could have been. I mean, it could have been in the way he treated, in the way it was politically motivated, and his the drugs administered to him. But I have to accept that. I don't have to lionize people. I can accept them for being imperfect and and I can see them as a tool for progress. Just like Johnson afterwards. Johnson was a big proponent of the Vietnam War and stuff like that. He actually increased our presence in Vietnam. But he also was the creator of the Great Society movement and moved ahead strongly with civil rights. He was a white guy from Texas, and he was surrounded by people that could not give a fig or fuck about whether someone could go to the same school or have the right to, have the equal access to voting or capital or anything like that. So the thing is about being liberal and conservative is that we accept and see clearly the failings of the people we put forward, and realize that it's not going to be perfect. If you think about it, there's nobody perfect. There is nobody perfect, and we have religious leaders that preach discrimination and hate and violence. There was a preacher on there suggesting that if Joe Biden wins, that maybe people should arm themselves. Really? It was that bad under Obama. The big thing that he did was the affordable health care. Come on. And look into your heart. Gay marriage is going to happen. Gay marriage is going to happen. It's going to be more accepting. And you're going to accept it too. You're accepting our party. There's gay people in the Republican Party right now. Tons of them. They had a group called the Log Cabin Republicans, which I really never understood the reason why they took the Log Cabin Republicans. I guess because they're trying to incorporate Lincoln, and Lincoln was an emancipator and things like that, and that's probably what he's saying. But I don't think gay people necessarily like log cabins more so than straight people. So you got to be able to accept that. You can't go and say you have to worship this person and things like that. You have to see the truth behind it. Um, you have to see the truth, and still see the truth behind it. Except these are your, if you do believe that it's a woman doesn't have the right to choice, that's all right. That's all right for you to believe that. I believe, may be incorrect, but to think that all Mexicans, Mexico's sending rapists and murderers across the border. Right now, Mexicans are sending firefighters to California and the Northwest in order to fight the wildfires. We've had countries that were our enemies send us aid after Katrina, or try to send us aid after Katrina and after some hurricanes and things like that. It's just, maybe it's a PR mood and stuff like that, but people do it. That's just what happens. And, what's the difference between someone doing something as a PR mood and not? It depends on what the intention is behind it, right? So, think about what you're doing. I want to get back to the point. Don't automatically think that someone, because they disagree with you, they don't know everything, all the points. Like I do understand the points of why people want to reduce when there is unchecked illegal immigration in the country. There will be criminals that come in, right? But there are criminals here already. But I think it far out the criminals far are outweighed by the hardworking people that come in here, and eventually the children of those immigrants will be people that will be in law enforcement, will be people that work in healthcare, that eventually be people that are teachers and things like that. And we just have that stuff. We have homegrown hate and violence here in the United States. People born here are much more. If you look at the per capita immigrant crimes versus per capita native-born crimes, they're much higher. People say, well, what if we don't allow immigrants in? We just wouldn't have those criminals. Those exact criminals will be here. That particular crime would not occur. Yes, maybe not. That particular crime committed by the one person that got in, yes, they wouldn't have. Or the 100 people that got in. I almost said a million, but I'm saying 100 people. But what would be the byproducts on there not having? It could be a slow-growing economy, entry-level jobs or agriculture jobs not being taken, and it caused more hardship in the end, and more poverty in areas that, causing rising prices in produce and things like that, causing people to be malnourished in the inner cities or in rural areas of the United States, and then, creating hardship where crime flourishes again. There has to be a solution for it, but it's not always the easy solution. And to have one solution is giving up on the possibility of change, and change can occur. And we can resist bad change, right? What's real bad change? Well, real bad change is a 5-degree increase in the average temperature and a total melting of the ice caps. So if there's a possibility of alleviating that, why wouldn't you consider it? Or just resist? Well, that doesn't have anything to do with it. It's just happening anyway. It's just happening anyway. It's like if someone came up similar and say, well, every so often, someone just comes up and starts beating you with a baseball bat. There's nothing you can do about it. Oh, you know what? Have a gun. Someone have it. Oh, I don't have my gun with me. Oh, I didn't have my gun out. The guy hit me with the bat first, and I didn't have my gun ready. Or we can say why. We can ask why is the person coming over and hitting you with a bat? Not that you encourage it. What's wrong with that? Oh, he's mentally ill. Why is he's taken care of? Oh, because there's no money being put into mental health. And the crazy person sitting on the street homeless, and they got themselves a bat and decided to hit this other person over the head with it. So that there's not always the easy solutions. So change occurs. Change is going to happen. And I thank you for listening. Share this episode with your friends. Follow us on Facebook. We'll be back. And until then, have a drink on me and take care. Bye. Let's play a little music.